Eric Haraldsson, nicknamed Eric Bloodaxe, was a 10th-century Norwegian ruler. He is thought to have had short-lived terms as King of Norway and twice as King of Northumbria. Epithet: Eric's sobriquet Bloodaxe, Bloodaxe, or Bloody Axe, is of uncertain origin and context. It is arguable whether its preservation in two Lausavige by Egil Skallagrimson and a contemporary skald genuinely dates to the 10th century or had been inserted at some stage when Eric was becoming the focus of legend. There is no guarantee that it significantly predates the 12th century narrative tradition, where it is first attached to him in Agger and in Latin translation as Sanguinea Securis in the Historia Norwegiae. The sagas usually explain it as referring to Eric's slaying of his half-brothers in a ruthless struggle to monopolize his rule over Norway. Theodoricus gives the similar nickname Fratrum Interfecta. Fake Skinner, on the other hand, ascribes it to Eric's violent reputation as a Viking raider. Family background. Father: The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes Eric laconically as Harald's son, perhaps assuming some familiarity on the reader's part. In the early part of the 12th century, John of Worcester had reason to believe that Eric was of royal Scandinavian stock. This appears to match with independent tradition from Norwegian synoptic histories and Icelandic sagas, which are explicit in identifying Eric of Northumbria as a son of the Norwegian king Harald Fairhair. The skaldic poems ascribed to Egil Skallagrimson may offer further reassurance that the sagas are on the right track, although doubts have been expressed about the date and integrity of the verses in the form in which they have survived. One of Egil's Lausavige speaks of an encounter in England with a man of Harald's line, while the Arenbjørnarkvidar envisages a ruler at York who is a descendant of Halfdan and of the Yngling dynasty. If genuine, the latter identification would form the only direct clue in the contemporary record which might link Eric with the Norwegian dynasty. Another Harald known from this period is Harald Mag Sitrick, King of Limerick, the probable father of Maccus and Gofraid. This may be relevant, since both these brothers and a certain Eric have been described as rulers of the Isles. In a letter addressed to Pope Boniface VIII, King Edward I remembered a certain Eric as having been a king of Scotland, subject to the English king. In the 19th century, a case had also been made for Harald Bluetooth, King of Denmark, as being Eric's true father. J.M. Lappenberg and Charles Plummer, for instance, identified Eric with Harald's son Hiring. The only authority for this son's existence is Adam of Bremen, who in his Gesta claims to cite the otherwise unknown Gesta Anglorum for a remarkable anecdote about Hiring's foreign adventures. Harald sent his son Hiring to England with an army. When the latter had subjugated the island, he was in the end betrayed and killed by the Northumbrians. Even if Eric's rise and fall had been the inspiration for the story, the names are not identical and Harald Bluetooth's Florut does not sit well with Eric's. A brother. In the account cited in full below, Roger of Wendover says that Eric was killed by a certain Maccus, elsewhere a son of Olaf, together with his son Herrick and brother Ragnald. Historians have been struck by the correspondence with names in Fake Skinner, which says that two of the kings who died with Eric in his final battle against Olaf were called Hariakut Kr and Ranvald, although they are not identified as relatives, mother and half-brothers. Further details on his family background are provided solely by the Icelandic and Norwegian sources of the 12th and 13th centuries, which are of limited and uncertain historical value and should therefore be treated with due circumspection. Harald Fairhair is usually portrayed as a polygamous and fertile king, the number of his sons varying between 16 and 20. While Eric's mother remains anonymous in the synoptic histories and most of the Icelandic sagas, the Heimskringla claims that she was Ragnhild, daughter of Eric, king of Jutland. The possibility that Harald had married a Danish princess may find some support in a skaldic stanza which is usually assigned to Thorbjorn, Ornklofi's Auensmal, a eulogy on Harald's deeds in the form of a conversation between a raven and Valkyrie. It tells that Harald chose the lady from Denmark, broke with his Rogaland loves, and his lemons of Hortherland, the maidens of Halagerland, and of Hatherland eke. Quote, in the Flat-eyed Jarbok, it is preceded by another stanza which refers to the handmaidens of Ragnhild as witnesses of the event. However, it is uncertain whether her name was already in the original composition, as another manuscript reading has the metrically regular Ambati Danska. The account of Heimskringla, which claims that Harald had enjoyed the company of 11 consorts before Ragnhild, and that of Eagle's saga are at variance with the suggestion elsewhere that Eric was one of the oldest, if not the eldest son of Harald. Whatever one makes of the discrepancy, the sagas, including Heimskringla, are unanimous in making Håkon Eric's younger half-brother and successor. Early career. According to Heimskringla and Eagle's saga, Eric spent much of his childhood in fosterage with the Hersir Thorir, son of Rold. Of his adolescent years, a remarkable picture is painted in Heimskringla, which recounts that Eric, aged 12 and seemingly possessed of prodigious valor and strength, embarked on a career of international piracy. 4 years were spent harrying the Baltic coasts and those of Denmark, Frisia and Germany, another 4 years those of Scotland, Wales, Ireland and France, and lastly, Lapland and Bjarmaland. Describing the last trip, Eagle's saga notes that Eric sailed up the Dvina River into the Russian hinterland of Permia, where he sacked the small trading port of Permina. Marriage. The Life of Saint Cathro of Metz, written c. 1000 at the latest and therefore of near contemporary value, has information about Eric and his wife. It relates that, after keeping him for some time, the king of the Cumbrians conducted Cathro to Loydum Civitatum, the boundary between the Normandy and the Cumbrae, and there he was received by a certain nobleman, Gunderic, by whom he was led to King Ericius in the town of York. Because this king had as wife a relative of the godly Cathro, given what is known of Cathro's own background, this probably means that she was of British or Scottish descent. This contradicts to some extent later saga tradition. According to the early 13th century Eagle's saga, Eric's consort at York was Gunhild, the famous mother of kings. This account was constructed by the author of Eagle's saga using an earlier poem called Arinbjörnarkvidar, Lay of Arinbjörn, and this poem does not mention Gunhild by name, implying therefore that the name was introduced by the author of Eagle's saga. Saga tradition is though unanimous that Eric did cohabit with a woman named Gunhild. Her name occurs in a handful of Eagle's Lausavige. The earliest saga historian Norwegian describes her as the daughter of Gormund Gamlid, king of Denmark. Most subsequent accounts name her father Ozurg, nicknamed either Totti, Teat, or Lafskeg, Dangling Beard, a man who hailed from the northern province of Halagerland. Icelandic hostility towards Gunhild has been cited as being a possible source for her dissociation from the Danish royal house. There is no consensus on how to solve this problem. An early suggestion is that the name for the king in York in the life of Cathro has been erroneously supplanted for Eric's predecessor Amleth Cuerang, whose wife Dunflaith was an Irish woman. Recently, Claire Downham has suggested that Ericius, Eric of Northumbria, is not the same Eric as Eric Bloodaxe, and there remains the possibility that Eric was not strictly monogamous, and the existence of two wives need not be mutually exclusive. King of Norway. The dominant theme of the sagas about Harald's numerous sons is the struggle for the Norwegian throne, in particular the way it manifests itself in the careers of Håkon and his foil Eric. According to Heimskringla, Harald had appointed his sons as client kings over the various districts of the kingdom, and intended Eric, his favorite son, to inherit the throne after his death. At strife with his half-brothers, Eric brutally killed Ragnvald, ruler of Hardaland, and Bjorn Farman, ruler of Vestfold. Some texts maintain that towards the end of his life, Harald allowed Eric to reign together with him. When Harald died, Eric succeeded to the realm, slaughtered the combined forces of his half-brothers Olaf and Sigurd, and gained full control of Norway. At the time, however, Eric's younger and most famous half-brother Håkon, often nicknamed Athelstein's Fustri, had been staying at the West Saxon court, having been sent there to be reared as foster son to King Ethelstan. Eric's rule was reputedly harsh and despotic, and so he fell rapidly out of favor with the Norwegian nobility. At this propitious time, Håkon returned to Norway, found a nobility eager to accept him as king instead, and ousted Eric, who fled to Britain. Heimskringla specifies that Håkon owed his success in large part to Sigurd, Earl of Lade. Determining the date and length of Eric's reign is a challenging and perhaps impossible task based on the confused chronology of our late sources. It is also unfortunate that no contemporary or even near-contemporary record survives for Eric's short-lived rule in Norway, if it is historical at all. Eric and the Jarls of Orkney. The Norse sagas differ in the way they treat the manner and route by which first Eric came to Britain after he was forced out of Norway. The synoptic histories offer the most concise accounts. Theodoricus goes straight for Eric's arrival in England, his welcome there by King Ethelstan, his brief rule and his death soon afterwards. Similarly, the historian Norwegian makes him flee directly to England, where he was received by his half-brother Håkon, baptized and given charge of Northumbria by Ethelstan. When Eric's rule became intolerable, he was driven out and slain on an expedition in Spain. Agra tells that Eric came to Denmark first. According to historian Norwegian, it would have been his wife's native country and hence a power base where he might have expected to muster some support, but the text makes no such claims. However, later sagas greatly expand upon Eric's activities in the interim between his reigns in Norway and Northumbria, claiming that Eric initially adopted a predatory lifestyle of raiding, whether or not he was aiming for a more political line of business in the longer run. The Jarldom of Orkney, the former Viking base subjected and annexed by Eric's father, came to loom large in these stages of the literary development. Fake Skinner mentions Eric's daughter Ragnhild and her marriage to an Orkney earl, Havard, but never describes Eric as actually stepping ashore. The Orkneyinga saga, written c. 1200, does speak of Eric's presence in Orkney and his alliance with the joint Jarls Arnkel and Erland, sons of Thorfina, but not until his rule in Northumbria was challenged by Olaf. However, a number of later sagas such as the separate saga of St. Olaf, Heimskringla, Eagle's saga and Olaf's saga tried to sonar and Mester assert that Eric sailed directly to Orkney, where he took the joint Jarls into vassalage, collected forces and set up a base which enabled him to organize several expeditions on overseas territory. Named targets include Ireland, the Hebrides, Scotland and England. Eric sealed the alliance by giving his daughter Ragnhild in marriage to the future Earl of Orkney, Arnfinn, son of Thorfinn Turfinarsson.